Good morning, children. Welcome to the class. Now, before we take off for the session, I would like to just share a thought with you. I let go of the past in order to move forward. That means that if you want to move forward in life, you need to forget about the past memories which are not good, which you don't want to remember. Just forget those memories. Keep only the good thoughts and the good memories with you if you want to move forward in life. Right. Now, with this thought, we move on with the chapter. Right. Now, since we have covered a major portion of the chapter and just a little part of the chapter was left that day, right? And I was talking about the World Trade Organization, right? Let me just fast go through it because the topic which I have to start from is connected to World Trade Organization only. Okay. So now, first of all, as I said, I discussed in the previous class that prior to WTO, right, World Trade Organization, there was an organization with the name GATT, that is General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, right? Now, this organization was set up in 1948 with 23 countries as its members. Okay. Now, the main purpose of setting up GATT was to look after, or what we call as administer, multilateral trade between the countries by providing equal opportunities to all countries. Now, here it is important to know what is multilateral trade. Okay. Now, multilateral trade means that when the trade is carried on between more than two countries, it is called as multilateral trade, right? Second thing we need to note down here is that by providing equal opportunities, that means the rules or the opportunities given to all countries should be the same. That means we should not discriminate between the developed and the underdeveloped or the developing countries. That this means that the rules for developed countries should not be different and the rules for developing countries should not be different. Means each country should be given the equal opportunity to carry on trade. That was the main purpose of GATT. Right. Now, in the year 1995, another organization, that is WTO, was set up, and it is the successor of GATT. Okay, after GATT, WTO was set up. Okay, now WTO has its, as I have already told you, it has its headquarters in Geneva, right? And there are certain aims with which WTO works, right? This is an international organization. Why do we call it as an international organization? Because it helps each and every country. It is not country specific, right? For so in the world, to promote trade, keeping that point in mind, WTO is working. Okay, so that is why we call it is an international organization, not restricted to any one or two countries. Now, what are the aims of WTO? The first aim which I've talked about was WTO agreement covers trade in goods as well as services, right? So that means under WTO, trade will be carried out of goods as well as of services. Okay, that means goods can also be exported, imported from one country to another, as well as services. The same will happen for services. Now, the second aim is that at present it has 164 member countries. Now, in GATT, we had 23 countries as its member, but now in WTO, we have 164, and India also is a member of WTO, right? Now, it follows the rule based regime. That means whatever the policies it is following that are fixed for every country, right? Means the countries cannot on their own change their change the rules policies as set up by WTO. Means if one particular policy is not suiting one country, so that country cannot change that policy according to its own requirements. So this is what we mean by false rule based regime. Okay, so every member country has to follow the same rules as set up by WTO. Next is it also aims to make best use of world resources. Clear? That means the resources we have, because since over the time we are being studied that resources are scarce and we need to make best use of the resources. So similarly, in the whole world, we come across the resources which are scarce. So WTO ensures or makes sure that each country is using the resources to their best capacity. Okay, then it also side by side helps to protect the environment, right? That means those commodities which are harmful for the environment, so WTO will not promote their production. Okay, some rules laws will be imposed for the production of such commodities so that our environment is safe. And the last aim is it promotes bilateral and multilateral trade through removal of tariff and non-tariff barriers. This means that WTO just not stresses on multilateral trade, rather it also encourages bilateral trade. So multilateral, as I said, means that when we have trade when we have trade with more than two countries, right? Three, four, five countries are trading among themselves, it will be called as multilateral trade. Bilateral means the trade between just two countries. Bi means two. Okay. So when there is a trade between two countries, so under WTO now, even the two countries can even trade with one another. This feature was not covered under GATT. Okay. So these are the aims as I talked about in the previous class. And also I talked about that India being a fair, let's say, carrying a, India being a member of WTO, so India carries out trade in a very fair manner. In the sense, whatever the rule, we follow the rules as set by WTO. But there are certain developed countries which are not following all the rules which are set by WTO because those rules are not suiting them. Being a powerful nations, so they are not following those rules, and WTO is not saying anything to those countries. So just keeping this thing in mind, so India has kept its commitments towards liberalization of trade by removing quantitative restrictions on imports and reducing tariff rates. Means India, as on the recommendations of WTO, that India will adopt liberalization, right? It liberalize it trade. Liberalize means to relax the country of some rules and regulations, restrictions, right? So we removed all the quantitative restrictions on imports, right? And also reduce the tariff rates under the new economic policy as per the guidelines given by WTO. So that means we have always been fair in doing trade with other countries. Secondly, India has always supported that Rules for all countries should be the same. This means that India has always come forward, has always been in the front line when it comes to framing of fair global rules. Global rules, sorry. So we have always supported this, right? That fair global rules should be framed. That means for every country, rules should be the same, right? And also, we have supported the thought that the developing countries should be given more, let's say, they should be given more encouragement so that they come at par with the developed countries. So we have always supported these things, right? Now, with this background of WTO, there are some scholars who say that there is no use for India to be a member of WTO because whatever WTO says, it is not sticking to those rules or whatever regulations it has framed. Means its rules are different from different countries. For developed nations, it has certain rules, and for developing nations, it has certain rules. So, in that case, it is not carrying out a fair trade for which it is being made. WTO is being made. So, therefore, it is of no use to be a member of WTO. This is the thought of some scholars. Okay, now why? Why they oppose of India being a member of WTO? The first reason they give is that the major volume of international trade is among the developed nations, right? This means that the developing nations are not getting any benefit. This means whatever the total amount of trade, international trade is being carried out, most of the trade takes place among the developed nation like America, UK. So these are mainly doing business with one another, trade with one another, and whatever benefits we should get from these developed countries, we are not getting them because they are not interested in doing trade with developing countries. Okay, so that means fair trade is not there. By multilateral trade means you can have trade relations with any country, but that these developed nations are not following. Second is that the developed countries are following unfair trade practices. Unfair trade practices basically means that they are not following the rules as set by WTO, right? Like we have an example that WTO said that we should remove agricultural subsidies. All the countries should remove agricultural subsidies, right? So, on the saying of WTO, India removed, it stopped giving subsidies to its farmers. And you know the result. When we don't give subsidies to our farmers, then the raw material, the seeds, fertilizers, pesticides become expensive for them, and therefore their cost of production also increases, right? So on the saying of WTO, we removed subsidies that was being given to the farmers, but the developed country like US is still continuing with the subsidies. It's still giving subsidies to its farmers. So what is the result is that there the farmers are incurring very less cost on producing the crops because they are given the let's say they are given subsidies always tend to lower the price, right? So therefore they are getting they are producing the crops at a lower cost, and then whatever they are producing, they are selling their produce in the international market at low cost as compared to other countries. India, if we are not getting subsidies, obviously our cost of production will come high. And when we sell our goods in international market, and there is US also who is selling its agricultural produce, but the cost of agricultural produce of US is less as compared to the cost of agricultural goods produced by India, because We are not giving subsidies. They are giving subsidies. The farmers are incurring lesser cost, and therefore they are able to sell their produce at at a lesser cost in the world market. So this is what we mean by this is the unfair trade practice which US is following, and being a very strong nation. WTO is not saying anything to US, because whatever the major grant the WTO receives, it comes from US only. Okay, so that is the big reason. Okay, so that means it is not a fair trade, right? Next is that the developing countries feel cheated as they are forced to open up their markets for developed countries. Now, this means that developing countries are being forced by WTO that they should allow other countries or the companies of developed countries to sell their goods in their country, right? Like India, in case of India, right? Now, WTO has forced us to allow the foreign goods to enter our market, right? But on the same at the same time, they are not allowing India to sell its goods in the markets of developed countries. So as a result, what will happen? There will be BOP crisis, right? Our domestic industries are then facing a threat now of foreign goods. Okay, that means we our imports will increase, right? When foreigners are going to sell goods, their good in our country, obviously our imports will increase, right? Because their goods will be priced at a lower cost because of the subsidies they are being given. Okay, so now in the domestic market, Indian goods will prove to be expensive, whereas foreign goods will be sold at a cheaper price. So our imports will increase. That means more of the foreign exchange will be going out of our country, right? But at the same time, when we are not allowed to sell our goods in international market, that means our exports are decreasing. And when exports are decreasing, this means that we are not able to increase our foreign exchange reserves. Inflow of foreign currency is not there in the country. So, as a result, outflow is more, outflow of foreign currency is more, inflow is less. This creates BOP crisis. Okay. So, on the basis of these three reasons, scholars say that there is no need to be a member of WTO. We should not, India should not continue to be a member of WTO, right? Now, after this, we have the last part of the chapter. That is what we always have. That is a critical assessment. Okay. Now, critical assessment, as I've told you earlier also, it basically means what all were the positive effects of reforms and what all were the negative effects of reforms. Okay. Now, all the good things that have happened under the reforms, right? We just take those things first. Now, first, what we experienced was that with the adoption, with the coming up of reforms, that is the policy of 1991, liberalization, privatization, and globalization, right? We registered an increase in the rate of economic growth. Economic growth is measured through GDP. Okay, so there was an increase in the rate of GDP from 5.6% in the year 1980 to 91 to 6.7% during the period to 2017 to 18, right? See, it was earlier 5.6%, and now the growth rate increased to 6.7%. Okay. Now, since we know that GDP of a country is the sum of or is contributed by agriculture sector, industrial sector, as well as service sector, right? These three sectors, whatever production these three sectors have, so whatever they sell in the market, that all together accounts as GDP. Okay, so now when we look into the trends, we notice that during this growth period, agriculture, the share of agriculture declined right? So production in the agriculture sector declined. Secondly, whereas in industry, it fluctuated. That means sometimes it increased, sometimes production in industrial sector decreased. So it fluctuated, right? It was not stable or following a particular trend. Okay. But if we talk about the service sector, right? In case of service sector, we have seen that the growth of service sector has gone up. That means there, whatever the growth in GDP we are observing, it is just because of the growth in the service sector. Okay, because agriculture sector there was a decline, industry it fluctuated, right? So ultimately it is the service sector which contributed to the economic growth during this period. Okay, so we can very conveniently sum this up in a line that whatever the growth was registered, right, that growth was because of the growth in the service sector, right? Service sector, there was expansion in service sector, so because of that there was growth in the economy. Okay, this growth was contributed by service sector alone. Now, second is that there was inflow of foreign investment, right? Now, inflow of foreign investment means foreign direct investment. I have explained what is the mean earlier, that what is the meaning of FDI and what is the meaning of FII. Okay, I hope you remember that. Now, there was inflow of foreign investment, that is more foreign investments were coming into the country, which is good, right? If we have more foreigners investing in our country, exchange of foreign reserves will increase, and side by side there will be new technology pouring into our economy, and we Indians can also follow that, we can also adopt that technology, make a similar technology and use in our domestic industries. So that was the benefit we got of the reforms, right? Now there are certain figures to support the inflow of foreign investment, that is from US dollar 100 million in 1991 to US dollar 36 billion in 2016 and 17. Okay, now 100 million to 36 billion, what a steady jump. Okay, so now this was what I want to say through these figures is that the foreign investment in our country increased, and basically we can contribute this increase in foreign investment to the policy which Mr. Narendra Modi initiated, was Make in India, right? Now, Make in India liberalized FDI policy in 2014, right? So we adopted this policy, Make in India, where all the foreign investors were invited or allowed, they were allowed to come and work in our country in collaboration with, maybe as independent units, maybe in collaboration with some Indian companies. So with that, we have experienced the growth in foreign investment. So all the credit, major credit rather, if I say, goes to Make in India campaign. Next, we have third point, there was increase in foreign exchange reserves. Okay, now since we know that more of the foreign technology is coming, foreign investments they are coming, the foreign exchange reserves also increased. Okay, now they increased from US dollar 6 billions in 1990-91 to about US dollar 321 billion in 2014-15. Okay, so 6 billions to 321 billion, right? Again, we say a very good jump, right? And now India is the sixth largest foreign exchange reserve holder in the world. Very good position to be in. Okay, that means we are the sixth largest foreign exchange reserve holder in the world, right? And the next we have, during the reform periods, India is seen as a successful exporter of auto parts. Now, earlier we were just exporting uh, textiles, jute, indigo, such type of things we were exporting. But during the reform period, our exports expanded, right? So now we were exporting auto parts, engineering goods, information technology software, textiles, right, in the reform period, right? Now, next, the rising prices have also been kept under control, right? So, now, rising prices basically, when I say that means I'm talking about the prices of essential goods, right? So, these prices were earlier increasing. What was the reason? Before the reform period, the reason was that Britishers forced our farmers to produce cash crops, right? So because of that, there was shortage of food crops, right? And with that, whenever we have shortage, prices tend to rise. So as a result, there was inflation. But now, after the reform period, the annual rate of inflation re- reduced from 17% in 1991 to 5.48% in the year 2015-16. Okay, so that means the prices have been kept under control. This means that the production of its essential goods was up to the requirement of the people, right? And moreover, therefore, this led to the fall in prices, and as a result, inflation reduced, right? So these are the some of the positive aspects of reforms, right? Now, with positive, we have also some negative aspects of reforms. Now, the first was that there was neglect of agriculture in new economic policy. Means agriculture sector was neglected, right? If we compare with industry, right, and the service sector, the other two sectors, if we compare, less of importance was given to the agriculture sector. Now, first thing, to support this statement, neglect of agriculture was there in new economic policy. To support this statement, public investment has been reduced in the reform period, right? Now, public investment means the investment that was to be done by the government, right, was reduced, right? In the sense that infrastructures, whatever infrastructure was required in agriculture sector, that infrastructure was not built up, right? There was no improvement, much of the improvement in irrigation, power supply, and various other things which we require in agriculture. So public investment in infrastructure was or has been reduced in the reform period. Second was that the fertilizer subsidy was reduced, right? Subsidy, as I have just now covered, that whenever we remove subsidies or when we give subsidy, it tends to lower the market price. Okay. But when these subsidies are removed, so that means farmers are buying the crops, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, right? Everything manure they are buying at a higher price. Okay, so fertilizer subsidy was reduced. This adversely affected the small and marginal farmers. So basically, the poor farmers were affected, and in India, majority of the farmers are poor. Okay, so that means there was a lot of farmers who were affected by the removal of fertilizer subsidy. Third is that there was liberalization and reduction in import duties. This means that there were quite a number of policies that were undertaken, right? There were quite a policies undertaken under the liberalization measures. Like we have studied that there was reduction in import duties, right? Now, what will be its impact if the import duties are reduced? That means the goods we are bringing or we are purchasing from foreign country, when they enter our country, some taxes were imposed earlier, but now under the reform period these taxes were removed, and these taxes which are imposed on imports is called as import duties. So these import duties on agricultural goods were reduced, right? Some we say ki, there were some lifting of, if we talk about the restrictions, like the quantitative restrictions, right, like quotas. So all these things were removed, right? Now these policies affected the farmers, right? Now, because with these policies being removed, the farmers have to face international competition, right? Earlier they were protected, industries were protected, and there were so many ways through which they were protected. But now when these restrictions were removed, right, imports were coming into our country at a less price. So that means more of the foreign goods were there in the country, right? And as a result, they were not very expensive also. Okay. Then quotas were lifted up, right? The quantities that was fixed on the imports, those quantity restrictions were removed. Now you can import as many goods as you wanted. So as a result, more of the foreign goods were coming in our country, and the domestic agricultural producers, right, they faced a tough competition. The agricultural goods coming from other countries were being sold at a lesser price. They were being, let's say, of better quality. There was a variety of crops that were coming into our country. So our farmers faced a tough competition. Then shift from food grains to cash crops led to rise in the price of food grains. This I have already covered, right? So basically commercialization of agriculture was there. So to let's say ki, just to commercialize the agriculture sector, farmers now started producing cash crops. Commercialization basically means then when the production is done for sale in the market to earn profits. So, in order to earn more profits, now farmers started producing cash crops. So, as a result, the food grain production decreased and shortage was there. As shortage is always there, so shortage is whenever there is a shortage, the prices tend to increase. So, this was basically neglect of agriculture sector in new economic policy. Now, second we have is the growing unemployment. Now, growing unemployment basically means that although, like I covered in the previous slide, when we were talking about the positive aspects, right? The first aspects, just see this. I am saying here that there was increase in economic growth rate. Okay, economic growth rate, as I said, basically means that GDP increased, right? So, although there was increase in the GDP, right, but this increase in GDP, right, could not generate employment up to the amount it was required, right? Means the rate of growth of employment was less as compared to the rate of growth of GDP. Because when a producer will produce more units of output, he will be employing more labor. So that means employment will be generated. But this was not the case here. Means they were not matching the increase in employment and the increase in GDP. The ratio was not matching. Okay, so there was growing unemployment in spite of the growth of GDP. Okay, now next we have there was low level of industrial growth, right? Now, industries, the growth in the industrial sector was very less, and we can account for this lesser growth, right? Because we say there was, first of all, cheaper imports reduce the demand for domestic goods, right? Like we have covered this, that import duties were removed, liberalized. So as a result, imports were coming at a cheaper price in our country, and because of this reduced the demand for domestic goods. When imports are cheaper as compared to domestic goods, obviously people will buy imported goods. Like just we had experienced the Chinese goods, right? Earlier our markets were flooded with Chinese goods, and we people were very proudly buying those goods because they were cheaper as compared to Indian goods. Although we were not concerned how much they will last, we were just concerned about the price. So this is the human nature. Okay, so because of that, there was demand for domestic goods decreased, whereas the demand for imported goods increased. Now, secondly, the industrial growth decreased. The growth in industrial sector decreased because of the lack of infrastructure facilities. Infrastructure facilities basically means that the power supply, interrupted power supply was there. Long power cuts were there. Okay, and secondly, there were lack of investments also. So when money is not there that can be invested, right, that is what we call as investment. So if money is not there, you cannot develop the industrial sector. So because of these infrastructural facilities also, there was low growth in the industrial sector. Okay, and the third was that non tariff barriers which were imposed by the developed countries. Tariff barriers are the taxes, non tariff barriers are the quotas. Okay, now these quotas, non tariff barriers by developed countries means that quotas on exports, right, were imposed, right, means quotas on the exports of developing countries, right. There were quotas, restrictions, quantity restrictions that were imposed on the quantity of domestic goods, right. India is selling in another country, so there were some quotas imposed on it, right. But on the same side, if I talk about the developed countries, they removed these quotas, like we covered in case of WTO, in case of subsidies. So similarly, this happened for non-tariff barriers. We were asked to impose the quotas, right? Quota restrictions which means whatever the quota restrictions were there, right? From our side, they were removed, but when it came to US, they imposed, right? So that was the one thing which further led to the low level of industrial growth. Fourth point, if I talk about, is the ineffective disinvestment policy. Now, what is disinvestment? Let's come back to that point again. Disinvestment basically means that when the shares of or the equity of public sector enterprises is sold to the general public, okay, to general people, right? So that is called as disinvestment. Okay, now the assets of public sector enterprises were undervalued since these public sector enterprises were running into losses. Now, to just get rid of these sectors, government sold these units to private sector at a very less cost. The value government assessed of these sick sector units was very less. Okay, just because if the price of these public sector enterprises will be high, so quite possible the private producers might not buy them. So just to get rid of these sick public sector enterprises, their value was undervalued. They were undervalued. Whatever actual value was there, less than that value was revealed, or at less than that value, these enterprises were sold to the private sector. Okay, and then above that, whatever the proceedings or whatever money government got by selling these PSEs to the private sector, that money was used to compensate shortage of government revenues. Rather, this should have been used to develop public sector enterprises, right? If you are getting money by selling one public sector enterprise, the money you are getting should be used for the development of other public sector enterprises. But this was not the case. That money was being used to compensate the shortage of government revenues. Whatever excess of expenditure government was incurring, that to cover up that excess of expenditure, the money which government got by selling these PSEs, that money was diverted towards that. Okay. So that was ineffective investment policy. And the last we have is the reforms and fiscal policies. Okay. Now, the reforms and fiscal policy basically says that the economic reforms which were imposed or which we followed placed a limit on the growth of public expenditure, especially in social sector. Social sector means where social welfare is to be extended. So in those sectors there was a limit on their growth, right? Because private sector was not coming forth, government didn't had enough of revenue, so there was a limit on the growth of public expenditure, right? And especially this affected the social sector. Second was that, as I said, the main aim or the main source of income of the government is through taxes, right? So now, just taking into the account, tax reduction have not resulted in increase in revenue for the government. Means under the policy of 1991, we have studied tax reforms. Under tax reforms we studied that the moderate amount of taxes were imposed now so as to avoid tax evasion, right? So that means more people should pay tax now, they should be paying more tax, more people should be paying tax. But this was not the result. Government reduced the amount or the rate of taxes, but in spite of that, this didn't increase the revenue of the government. People, there were still some people who were not paying the taxes. Okay, even after there was reduction in the rate of taxes. So we expected that if there is tax reduction, more people will pay tax and the revenue of the government will increase. But actually, this did not happen. Okay. So that means government was losing money, which it could have earned. Okay. Then tariff reduction have reduced the scope of increasing revenue through custom duties. Now, tariff reduction have reduced. Tariff is what? Taxes which are levied on exports and imports. So when we were exporting or importing goods from other countries, some taxes were imposed, right? So these taxes were also reduced. Now, with the reduction of these taxes, again, there was, we say, government was earning lesser income, because when higher taxes were imposed, government, more income used to come to the government. But now, after reducing the taxes, right, customs duties, like I have taken the example here, right, after reducing the taxes, the revenue of the government decreased, right? So because now government was not getting enough of amount through the custom duties. And the last, in order to attract foreign direct investment, tax incentives were provided, right? Like we have said, foreign direct investment increase, that was a positive outcome, right? But to bring this foreign direct investment into our country, what we did was we reduced the tax, we gave tax incentives. Tax incentives means these foreign companies were given tax concessions, that they'll be paying lesser tax if they invested money in India, right? So that means earlier we were getting a good amount of taxes, but just to invite these foreign companies into our country, tax concessions were given, and then again government was losing upon this money, right? That is what it could have earned through this tax revenue. So these are all the negative aspects of reforms. Okay, so now with this I have completed the chapter also, right? Now there is an assignment. Okay, assignment, you need to note it down. I'm just giving you 2 minutes to note it down, or if you want you can take a screenshot of it. Okay, so assignment, this is assignment of chapter 2, right? Now first I'll be covering the 3 marks question, right? Now first is, why did India adopted mixed economy? Okay, you have to give me the reasons here. 3 marks means 3 points to be covered, or either the word limit will be 60 words, right? Now, second, it says define the term plan. Why should plans have goals? Definition always comes for 1 mark. So, when it is for 3 marks, bifurcation you can easily do it on your own. That is, definition will be of 1 mark, and the remaining marks will be for the rest of the question, right? So that is define the term plan, 1 mark, and why should plan have goals? This you will answer for 2 marks. Okay, give me 2 reasons for this. Then question 3, why was our government interested in the policy of land to the tiller? Right, we have done that, land to the tiller. Now why our government was interested in this policies? Reasons, 3 reasons need to be given. Then explain the need to introduce land reforms post independence, right? Post independence means after independence, right? Pre independence means before, pre means before. So I'm using the word post independence. Please read the question carefully. Okay. So explain the need to introduce land reforms post independence means why was there a need to introduce land reforms after we got independence? What wrong was there earlier, right? So in the in the agriculture sector, right? Okay. Next we have differentiate between socialist economy and capitalist economy. Now please always remember that whenever we ask for difference, differences have to be given in the form of a table. This is the format we have. Okay, so give the differences in the form of the table, and each point, like if you make a table and on one column you write socialist economy, and another the other column you write capitalist economy. First point you give the meaning, right? So meaning of both the types of economies will give you 1 mark. Okay, not one here and one there, no. Okay, so socialist economy meaning of socialist and meaning of capitalist together will give you 1 mark. Okay, and as such we there is no need as such to give the column of basis, on what basis you are differentiating. No, there is no need as such, but if you still want to give, it's your choice, it's not a compulsion. Okay, so 3 points of differences, complete differences. Okay, then 4 marks question, what were the risks involved under green revolution, and what steps were taken by government to overcome these problems, right? So risks you are going to give, then as many as we have, right? The number of risks we have covered. Just give those risks, and along with that, what steps our government has taken, right? Like one of them I can say that the research institutes were opened up, right? So these are the steps. So just find out the other one, although I have covered. Okay, now write a short note on effect of policies on industrial development during the period 1915 1990. See, here you are writing a short note, so please underline the keywords with a free hand. Okay, right? There's no need to use a scale and a pencil and make it that way. No, just in a running hand, just underline the keywords. Okay, that is very important. Okay, then this needs to be answered in 80 marks. Then 6 marks question, planning in India focuses on long period goals, or we can also call long period objectives. Explain, right? 6 mark question, 100 words. Okay. Then next is distinguish between equal and equitable distribution of income. Which one is more important and why? Right? So when you will give equal and equitable distribution of income, the meaning that will be of 2 marks, right? And then which one is more important, for that you will be giving in 1 mark, right? You will be mentioning it, whether equal distribution is important or equitable, whichever you think is there. Okay, then support it with the reason, right? 3 marks will be for the reason. Okay, so equal distribution of income 1 mark, equitable distribution of income again 1 mark. Which one is important? 1 mark. And why? That is reason, right? So if you support it with reason, the reason will be for 3 marks. So this is I have for the chapter 2. Now we have another chapter, right? We have another chapter. Sorry, I am very sorry. Okay. Yeah. Now I have another chapter here. We are starting with the next unit, right? This is unit 5, right? Unit 4 we have covered that. Okay. Now we are starting with the next unit. Please always remember that in a unit we have a lot many number of, we can have a lot many number of chapters. Okay. So now unit 5 says it is about the current challenges facing Indian economy. Right? Current challenges means these are those challenges which we are facing till today. Right? Means the day we got independence, from that day till today, we are still struggling with certain problems. Right? And those problems are the current challenges. Right? Like I have given the heading down below in the last line, that is chapter 4. It is poverty. Poverty is one of those challenges, right? We are, let's say, fighting, we are struggling to eradicate, remove poverty, but still we are not being able to, right? So we will be studying about poverty, then we have unemployment, then we have sustainable development, an emerging issue that has come. Then after that, infrastructural problems, right? We don't have very good infrastructure now, although we are improving, but as sorry, as compared to the developed nations, we don't have that sound infrastructure. So we are still making it hard on our end to strengthen our infrastructure. So human capital formation, so there are certain chapters in this unit which we will be taking one by one. So let me first start with the very, let's say, general topic here, that is poverty. Right? Now poverty, as we have studied that when we got independence, at that time what was our main aim, what was the main aim of our government? The main aim of our government at that time, if you people remember, was that to provide basic minimum needs to its people: food, clothes, shelter. Okay. And thereby, side by side, reduce poverty. So these were the two main aims at that time. Right? Now, we followed the development, we achieved development by following the pattern of 5-year plans. Okay, like 1950 Planning Commission was set up, 1951 first plan was initiated, right? So that means for 5 years we plan in advance, right? We plan our resources in advance. We set our goals for the next 5 years. This is a system of 5-year plan. Now these plans expected to uplift the poorest of poor, right? Means among the poor category, those who are poorest, right? They are called as Antyodaya, right? They are called as Antyodaya. So that means to uplift the poorest of poor, right? That was the first purpose of following the 5-year plans. And second purpose was that to bring poor people at par with the other sections of the society. And last was that to have minimum standard of living for all, right? That means three main aims were there, right? First, upliftment of poor, right? Second, bringing the poor people at the level with the richer or the other sections of the society. And third was each and every person should maintain a minimum standard of living. Okay, right? So that were the three. Now, I just move on to the word poverty. Now, what is poverty? Poverty refers to a state in which an individual is unable to fulfill even the basic necessities of life, right? This is how we define poverty, right? So, poverty is the state wherein an individual or a person is not able to fulfill his basic needs. Now, basic needs include what? Food, cloth, shelter, right? Education and health. You have studied food, cloth, shelter, right? But now, with the time changing, the definition of basic necessities has also changed. Now it consists of the basic necessity consists of food, cloth, education, housing, and health facilities. If a person is not getting these minimum amount of these things, these five things, he will be considered as poor. Okay, so now who are actually poor? The next thing we have to learn about is who are considered as poor. Now, poor can be divided into two categories. Means we can find them in rural areas and as well as in urban areas. Okay, so poor in rural areas, we can take the example. If you go to the remote areas, villages, right, there agriculture being the dominant occupation till date, so you will find poor in the form of landless agricultural laborers, right? Those farmers who are working on the land of some other person, right? They don't have a land of their own, so that means they are working as tenants on some other person's land. Secondly, cultivators with very small land holdings, right? So means there can be some cultivators who own the land, but the size of the land is very small that farming cannot be done comfortably or profitably on that piece of land. Okay, and then the marginal farmers. Okay, those marginal farmers, again we say the farmers who are very poor. So basically, in rural areas, we find the examples of poor as landless agricultural laborers, cultivators with very small land holdings, marginal farmers, right? And how do we recognize them, right? How do we recognize poor people in rural areas? Now, their key features, main features on the basis of which we recognize these people as poor are first, they are landless, right? They don't have a land of their own. Second, if at all they have a land, it is dry or wasteland. Okay, means firstly they'll not have land of their own. Secondly, if at all some of them have it, so this land will be a dry land, means where the production cannot be done comfortably. It will not yield profits to the land owner. It is a wasteland. Fertility is very less on that land. Okay. And third, many of them don't get even 2 meals a day. So such people cannot even afford to get 2 meals in a day. So these are the key features through which we can recognize poor in rural areas. Now let's come to our area, that is the urban area. Now in urban areas, we find people who are the push cart vendors, like the vegetable sellers nowadays coming in the streets, right? Then the street cobblers. Street cobblers means they are sitting under the shade of a tree or somewhere like that. They don't have a proper shop. Okay, then rag pickers, right? We see children carrying a sack on their back, and then whatever litter they sort out that litter, and whatever thing which they find to be which can be sold easily and through which they can earn money, they pick them, like the bottles, right? Then certain cardboard boxes, so something like that. These people pick these things and sell it to the scrap vendor. Okay, and thereby earn income, money. Sorry. Now, similarly, we have beggars. Yes, beggars on the crossings, right? So these type of people are some of the examples of poor people in urban areas, right? Now, how do we recognize poor people in urban areas? Basically, these people possess few assets, right? Means these people have very few assets. They live in kacha hutments. Kacha hutments basically means that their houses are made of mud, right? Then walls are made of mud and the roofs of dry grass, right? So the house are not very, we say, durable ones. Okay. Then third, we have poorest of them don't even have such dwellings. So those among the ones, the list I have given above, out of those, some of them even don't have such dwellings. Dwellings means the place to live in, houses. Okay, they don't even have such houses. They are living on streets, they are living on footpaths. Okay, so that is another characteristics. And the third is that most of the people who we consider poor in urban areas are the outflow of people coming from rural area to urban areas. Means these are the migrants, right? These people migrate from rural areas to urban areas in order to earn good income. So with this, I just end my class here. Please go through the topics, complete your assignment. Thank you. Have a safe day and be safe. हाँ, अरे स्टॉप स्टार्ट रिकॉर्डिंग इकोनॉमिक्स से किसमें ऑप्शन थी